Hi everybody, FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos here, and today I'm going to take a look at a fabulous, or maybe not so fabulous, blitz game that I played a few weeks ago against some random IM. And, well, the reason why I'm showing it is that it was kind of a fun game. I mean, it's very, very short, but a little bit amusing. But also, it was occasioned by my seeing, recently browsing this or that chess site, that there's a new book on the Ponziani that just came out. And this struck me as an answer to a question that absolutely nobody is asking. I don't think I've ever heard anyone say, gosh, I wish there was a book on the Ponziani. Hope someone's writing one. When do you think it'll come out? Never heard this in my life. The Ponziani is one of the absolutely most boring openings imaginable. And it's funny, you know, because some people play it because they want to avoid dull theory. Well, okay, perhaps, you know, they're avoiding dull theory and going to dull theory. Anyway, for those of you who play the Ponziani and love it, and I'm insulting you, I sort of apologize, but not entirely. I mean, it depends. I mean, you know, there are some very interesting lines in this opening, but by and large, I mean, the main line is just exceedingly dull. And you know, it's been known to cause hundreds of deaths among club players worldwide. All right, well, let's take a look at this game and this opening. So e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and c3. This is what constitutes the Ponziani. So it's a logical move. I mean, you know, the idea is to play d4 and grab the full pawn center. You know, and it's very sensible. Now there are a couple of ways that black can play against this. Couple of main ways. I mean, there are all kinds of sidelines that are possible here as against practically any opening. So the main moves are knight to f6, which is what I played, and d5, which is a sharper approach, and maybe justifies it. Now, once upon a time, it was thought that bishop to b5 was good here. I think now this is considered not so good. I don't remember all the ins and outs. I mean, it's probably something, I don't know if it's queen of g5 here or queen of d5. Anyway, if you care about this opening, you can look it up. Queen d5 is the most common move, but I have a feeling maybe queen of g5 is the move. So let's see. Queen g5, queen a4, queen g2, bishop c6 check, pawn takes, queen over, king to d8, rook f1, bishop h3, queen a8, king e7. Okay, and this is just some kind of bizarre series. This has been played a number of times, and I have no idea what's going on here. But if you want to play the Ponziani, you should know about this. On the other hand, I'm sorry, I should say if you want to play this against the Ponziani, you should know about it. I believe the current main line against it is queen a4. And here I think black doesn't go on any adventures with d takes e5 anymore. It doesn't really do anything now, but plays bishop to d7. And, okay, white can play d3, but let's say e takes d5, knight to d4, queen d1, takes, queen takes, knight f6. And black, I would suppose, has reasonable compensation for the material here. I don't see why he wouldn't, but perhaps Ponziani aficionados know better. Alright, all I know is that knight to f6 is perfectly adequate and gives black good play. Okay, well here the main move is d4. I mean, I suppose white could play d3, but that would like be dullness on steroids. So we'll stick to d4. Now here actually, okay, no, I played knight takes e4, which is the main move. Black can also play e takes d4. Against this, white plays e5, and alright, this can be a little bit more interesting. I think the best move here is knight to d5, and if c takes d4, then bishop to b4 check. Black is developing very easily. Takes, knight b takes d2, and then d6 with a very, very good, very easy game. But I think white can avoid that and play bishop to b5. And this is maybe more challenging. Alright, I'll not go any further with this. This might even transpose into some kind of goofy Ruy Lopez line. So I don't know. Maybe bishop to e7, maybe a6. Okay, bishop e7, castles, castles, whatever. C takes d4, and play goes on. So I don't really know that I would recommend e takes d4, but it might be a reasonable alternative. So again, something you can consider if you find the main variation too stupefyingly dull. Although I'll show you a line that is anything but dull. So knight takes e4 is what I played. d5 is the only move that ever gets played here. And now black has three main moves. So there's knight to b8, not considered especially interesting. Knight takes e5, queen to e7, queen d4, knight to d6. Alright, and this goes on in its own thrill-packed way. I played knight to e7, which is also stupefyingly dull, but sometimes I don't mind stupefyingly dull. Anyway, after all, I play the Berlin sometimes too, so you know how exciting a player can I be? And then the exciting line is bishop to c5, and maybe I should play this next time I face this in blitz, just to put a little verve into the game. So d takes c6, bishop f2, not knight f2. Knight f2 is just a blunder, I believe. If I remember right, queen to d5 is just awful. So we're threatening to take, we're threatening to take, we're threatening to take. This is too much. So bishop f2, king e2, and then b takes c6. And this is quite entertaining. So black's got three pawns, three of the little guys for the piece. White's king is in the center. On the other hand, after queen to a4, black has some problems too. I mean, if he plays d5, then he's going to lose this pawn and then lose more stuff. So f5 is the move here. Knight b to d2. And you can see that black's pieces are a little bit overextended. Castles, I think, is the usual move. Knight takes, pawn takes, queen takes. The bishop goes back. And, all right, you know, it's an interesting position. I don't know if white really is in any danger here. I think I'm not sure that black's compensation is really sufficient. So, you know, the thing is, I played the Ponziani very briefly when I was younger, so it seemed kind of like an interesting idea, something different. So I tried it out, played it for a couple of months, maybe a month or so, just in blitz. I don't think I ever used it in a tournament game. And all right, after a little research, I saw that it really wasn't all that thrilling, and moved on to back to other openings. Anyway, after c3, knight f6, d4, knight e4, d5, knight e5 is what I played. So it's just solid. It's sound. There's nothing really wrong with it, and black is just fine. So we continued along the main path. Knight e5, knight g6, and okay, the usual move here from white is queen to d4, and after this, queen f6 or queen to e7. Queen takes e4, queen e5, takes, and you know, this is a position where people, you know, just fall into immediate comas and die. All right, I'm overstating this a bit, but you know, the symmetry in the position makes it quite level. Actually, I've done very well with black the few times I've faced this, even against very good players. And I would say the reason is that I don't mind endings, and you know, I think there are subtle imbalances in the position that keep some life in it. But nevertheless, I mean, objectively speaking, I mean, you have to have a taste for this kind of thing, and if you're playing blitz to get all kinds of crazy positions, this is not the chess for you. Okay, queen to d4 is one line, as I said. Another line is queen to f3, and here queen to e7, trying to get to that same kind of situation. It works on queen e4, but knight takes g6, hg6, and bishop to e3 is perhaps favorable for white. So after queen to f3, the best move is knight to f6, knight takes g6, h takes g6, and I can't believe that white has anything here whatsoever. Probably bishop to e3 is best to take away c5 from black, but I don't know. Seriously, I can't take this too seriously as a winning try for white. There may be some you know, super duper aficionados of the Ponziani who will try to show that there's some variation where the computer says that white is plus 0.27 better if he makes 12 accurate moves in a row. I don't know. I doubt it, but it's possible. But anyway, I think black has just nothing to worry about that's serious in a position like this. You still have to play chess, so don't get me wrong. I mean, the game is not an immediate draw by any means, but as far as the theoretical battle goes, I mean, black is just fine. So you can play queen to e7 with the idea of queen e4. You can play bishop to e7. You can play rook to h5. Any normal move here should be perfectly okay. So even c6. All right. So anyway, instead of these lines with the queen coming to d4 or f3, my opponent played knight takes g6, h takes g6, and then bishop to d3. And okay, here this I wasn't familiar with, and so I had to stop and think. And it's an interesting position, and there's some fun tactics. I mean, basically what I want here for black, I mean, I've got the open H file, so that certainly has me salivating, looking for tactical possibilities. And I'd really like to put my bishop on c5 so I can put the pawn to d6 and develop all my pieces as healthily as possible. Of course, something like knight to f6 is playable, and it's in fact just fine. So knight f6, let's say castles, maybe bishop to d6 is interesting, rook to e1 check, king f8, g3, and the play is pretty unclear. I mean, black can play maybe c6 here, maybe rook to h5 to put some pressure on the d5 pawn, and I think in either case, black is doing well. But I didn't really, I considered it, it flashed through my mind, but I mean, it wasn't in keeping with what I wanted to achieve. So one move I looked at was queen to e7, of course. And, okay, if white plays queen to e2, then knight c5 is just completely equal, no problems here at all. I rejected this, of course, because of castling. After castling, white's just clearly better. All the pieces I've got on the e file, this is not helping me. And I could try queen to h4, but he just plays h3, and really I just don't have enough. Of course, if I play bishop to c5, I lose. This is a blunder. He just takes, and I don't have any gas on f2, and if takes, then rook e1. Okay, so that's very, very simple. What else? Oh, okay, one other idea that I had was if he plays bishop to e3 here, well, then I have knight to g3. Funny looking move, and this is actually quite good here. But it also got me to think, okay, we're actually seeing this knight to g3 idea made me think, well, why don't I play queen to h4 first? Okay, I didn't play this, but I was just calculating. I spent, I don't know, probably a minute or two on this one move, at least a minute and a half, I think. So then the point would be that if, okay, first of all, I can't castle because it's mate in 1, and if g3, queen to e7, bishop to e3, well, now I even get a pawn in addition to making this strong move, taking advantage of the loose bishop on e3 and the hanging rook on h1. All right. However, this pleasant little fantasy is again refuted by simply castling, and this version is even worse for me, as I don't even have queen to h4 followed by king to d8. So here I'm probably even just losing in this version of it. And furthermore, even queen to e2 is pretty good for white. Okay, so in sum, these queen moves are really not cutting the proverbial mustard here. So queen to e7 is dubious at best, and I think queen to h4 is just a full-fledged mistake. Okay, so I had to reject those moves. And finally I came up with knight to c5. So I preferred this to knight f6 because it keeps the d8 h4 diagonal open to my queen, so I can bring my queen out to h4 if he castles and go for blood. Alright, well here he played bishop to c2, which is quite natural. But castling is actually not so bad. This can be considered seriously. For instance, okay, if I take and play queen to h4, not caring about this check. Alright, he plays h3. And I just don't have anything really. Even if I play d6, aiming for bishop h3 stuff, it doesn't really matter because, okay, let me put the arrows here, because the queen on d3 is covering it. So there's no real brilliant sacrifice to be had. And okay, I can play this first, but essentially, I'm behind in development. I have nothing on the H file, and my king is stupid on D8. And it's stupid not because it's really in a lot of danger, maybe a little danger, but it's stupid because it means that the rook on A8 is going to be a spectator. So a lot of people, I think, don't fully appreciate the value of castling, which is, yes, king safety. Obviously, that's a big part, but the point of connecting the rooks is quite important as well. And so that's the big drawback for black here. Okay, so and if d6, just to continue this variation, all right, he just takes, plays knight to d2, and white's just winning here. I mean, this is a joke. Okay, d6 is bad as well, but even before that, white is clearly better after this check. So after, or I should say, not even the check, but after, queen h4 is the error. So after takes and takes, I should play more restrained. Bishop to e7 or bishop to d6. So, for instance, bishop to e7, rook e1, castles, and this is pretty close to equality. I mean, maybe white has like some kind of microscopic advantage, but really this is just the basic type of Ponziani position where black should just be fine. Okay, as I said, bishop to d6 is also a reasonable possibility. And after rook to e1 check, I go to f8, so at least the a rook will still have e8 to go to, and this rook on h8 is already employed. So it's not as important to connect the rooks here. So white should probably play h3, and again, maybe he's got a small advantage, but nothing too serious. Okay, but at least this is better than dead equality for white. All right. As I said, he played bishop to c2 instead. And here I played the funny-looking move, but it's actually, I think, best, bishop to d6. So I think this is a good move. The point is obvious. He can't castle because he just gets mated. So if you don't see the mate, take a couple of seconds to figure it out. Where is the checkmate after castles? Okay, here's the answer. Castles, bishop h2, king h1, bishop goes back anywhere, let's say g3, and then rook h1, and queen h4, and queen h2. Okay. Of course, even if there's no mate, castling is horrible, but it's worth pointing that out. On the other hand, I'm not really threatening to take on h2 yet because that would just lead to my bishop being trapped. But, he's got to figure out what to do with his king. Now, he could play queen to e2 check in this position. Certainly it's better than castling. But black is fine after either queen to e7. I think this is just equal. Or I could play more ambitiously with king to f8. And let's say b4, knight a6, a3. So trying to keep my knight out of the game and maybe follow up with c4, c5. Here I think c6 is equal. And maybe even better than equal is b6. With the point that if, let's say, c4, which is probably not best, then queen to f6, hitting the rook, rook a2, bishop to b7, and now black is getting ready to break with either with either b5 or c6, or also play rook to e8. So I think all of this together gives a very good game. Again, white still can't castle, and if he plays h3, which is a bit dubious, perhaps, but he is already clearly worse. Then rook to e8, bishop to e3, and c6. Very strong move, and black is even winning in this position. Alright, so it was a slightly cooperative line, but not that cooperative. I mean, there were most of the white moves were pretty natural, including the inaccuracies. So I'm just trying to show some of the ideas that I have here and some of the ways in which white can get into trouble with surprising ease. Okay, well, instead of queen to e2 check, my opponent played h3. Obviously, he wants to castle, so obviously, or just as obviously, I'm going to try to make that inconvenient for him. So I play queen to e7 check. Okay, if he plays queen to e2, then I would swap and play a5 to secure my knight. And here I think I'm at least equal and maybe even a touch better. So a5 secures the knight, and then I'm going to follow up with things like b6, bishop to a6 check, castle long, and so on. So certainly black has whatever initiative there is to be had in this position. So he played bishop to e3 instead, still aiming to castle, and I kind of hastened him along in that way with b6. So I'm threatening to play bishop to a6, and this is not something that my opponent wants to see, so he castles. And now I play queen to e5, and all of a sudden we see that he's in a little bit of trouble. Certainly danger. Maybe that's a more accurate way to put it. Well, he's got to play g3 here. I mean, f4 hangs the bishop, so that doesn't come into consideration. And if rook to e1, then queen h2, king f1, bishop to a6 check, and thanks for playing, nice knowing you. This is going to cost him a full queen, or else he gets mated like so. So, as I said, g3 is absolutely forced. Rook e1, we can append some question marks to. And now I play rook takes h3. And here my opponent just panicked and managed to lose within one move. He played rook to e1, which looks quite sensible at first. So it's a blunder, but it's a sensible looking blunder, because first of all he's giving himself the f1 square for his king to run away to. And he's also threatening, of course, lots of discoveries with his bishop. What he had to play, though, was bishop to f4. So this was really just forced. And it turns out that he actually has decent compensation for the pawn. So it's white who has to prove that he's okay, but he probably is. So, for instance, queen f6, and rook to e1 check, king f8, bishop takes d6, queen takes d6, b4. And now I could play on with knight to a6, but it's going to take me a little time to get the knight back to playing with the rest of the kids. So I would say that white has at least compensation for the material here. Not more, but some compensation. Or I could just take the lazy way out with rook takes g3 and grab the perpetual check. Because he never has king to f1 after takes and takes. I mean, this is just equal. But, of course, if he plays king to f1, then with bishop to a6 check, rook e2, rook e8, I'm perfectly happy to obliterate him in this position. But, again, if he just plays king to h1, it's an immediate draw. So I would probably play knight to a6 here. Maybe it would depend on the time situation. Okay, so that's on queen f6. I could also try queen to h5. And here too, the position is going to be roughly equal. Takes, 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 takes. Let's say knight to a3 with the idea of knight to b5, or maybe knight to c4. And of course I can't play rook takes d5 because then I'm walking into trouble every which way. So not only possible forks with knight to b5 and knight to c7, that might not work as a king to d8, but b4 and then bishop to e4 with the rook skewer on the diagonal. So probably best is king to d8, then b4, knight a6, knight b5, not pawn, knight to b5, knight to c7, takes, king e7 with about an equal position. So bishop to f4 after my rook takes h3 would have been a good move, keeping his cool and keeping the game going. But as I said, instead he played rook to e1. And here I would suggest that you try to calculate all the variations out to the win. So it's not a bad exercise, especially because one of the lines is actually a bit tricky and perhaps doesn't lead to a black win. So you have to have a little more imagination than the most obvious move. Okay, well the first move is obvious and led to his resignation. Rook takes g3 check, and he gave up. And the reason is that after rook takes g3, okay, f takes g3 is the only move that makes any sense. If king h1, then I can play rook to g1, or of course just play rook to h3, check, bishop to a6, check, and rook to e2 is inevitable, or he gives up the queen again, and then queen h1 is mate. So that's easy. So f takes g3 is the responsible try. Queen g3. Okay, if king h1, queen h2 is mate, so king f1, bishop to a6 check. But now here comes the funny part. After rook to e2, queen takes e3 is actually a mistake. It looks incredibly natural, incredibly obvious, but the problem is that after bishop to d3, hey, my queen is stuck. It's trapped. I can play bishop d3. That's all right. He plays queen takes d3. Knight takes, rook takes, knight e5, and at the end of the day, I've got a bishop and 3 pawns. Of those 3 pawns, 2 are doubled for the rook. So yeah, black is certainly better here, but it's there's still work to be done. So back here, instead of queen takes e3, the right way to play this is to castle long. Now queen takes e3 is threatened, and even better than queen takes e3, there's rook to h8, followed by rook to h1. And this is just crushing. It's over. So, for instance, knight to d2, rook h8, and thanks for playing. Okay, so that was the game, and for all the fun I made out of the Ponziani, white was okay, and maybe the line where white castles on in this position on move 9 maybe gives him a microscopic edge. So nothing serious, but better than, as I said, complete dead equality. Although I think it's pretty dead there too, with reasonably responsible play by black. But as we see, even in these dull openings, there are chances for excitement. In this case, it was white who was the victim of the excitement, but nevertheless, it shows that there is still play to be had. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this game, and again, those of you who are big Ponziani fans, I hope you weren't too terribly offended. So you can make fun of my openings too. I won't take it too personally. All right, well, thanks a lot, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.